Hello and welcome to the EDRM Global Webinar channel. My name's Mary Mack. I'm the CEO and Chief Legal Technologist for EDRM. Today's webinar is an EDRM collaboration with eDiscovery Today's Doug Austin called the third annual eDiscovery Today State of the Industry Report survey results. Our faculty experts are Doug Austin and myself. We welcome your questions and feedback in the console. This webinar will be recorded and available for replay at your convenience, as are all of our webinars. Kaylee Wallstead, our EDRM Chief Strategy Officer, is here to tell us about the resources available for our listeners. Kaylee?
Thanks, Mary. Welcome, Doug. We're excited to have you here today.
Great to be here and looking forward to this.
So for our audience, thank you so much for joining us. If you look at your console, you'll see a paperclip. And if you click on that, you'll see the attachments and resources available to you. Up next on the EDRM webinar channel, Tuesday, January 17th, Cyber Nostradamus, what awaits in 2023? And we have two incredible experts who will be speaking on how to stay safe in 2023 and how to be prepared. Dr. Jack Dever, who is a former Assistant General Counsel to the FBI, and his brother, James Dever, who is a former U.S. Air Force professor of cyber warfare. So that they are just amazing, and that'll be a great discussion you will not want to miss. Also, a hashtag do not miss. You will want to get your complimentary copy of the 2023 State of the Industry Report, eDiscovery Trends, that Doug Austin and eDiscovery Today has put out. And that has been sponsored every year by EDRM, and we are thankful to Doug for your partnership in that. In order to get your complimentary copy, it is very simple. Click the link, and Doug actually has instructions on how to subscribe to his eDiscovery Today blog. That's all you have to do, and it costs nothing. And last, you will not want to miss out on the kickoff for 2023 important eDiscovery case law decisions for January 2023 on January 19th with Doug Austin, Mary Mack, Tom O'Connor, and the Honorable Judge Peck, retired. We'll be back again for Doug. What is it, 3 years now?
3+. Yeah, I think we're in the midst of our fourth year doing this. So yes.
Amazing. So the link to register for that, again, it's the hashtag do not miss. So lots of great stuff. And back to you, Mary.
Thanks, Kaylee. Yeah, and for our listeners, you can download a certificate of attendance from the console after the webinar is complete to use for your continuing ed requirements. And Doug Austin, what can we say about Doug Austin? Doug Austin from Houston is the editor of our wonderful EDRM partner, eDiscovery Today. He's an EDRM Global Advisory Council leader, an established eDiscovery thought leader with over 30 years experience providing eDiscovery best practices, legal technology consulting, and technical project management services to numerous commercial and governmental clients. And you probably know he's published a daily blog since 2010, but you may not know that he writes white papers and articles as well, and has received the JD Super Reader's Choice Award 3 times. Doug, you've got some things for us here today, don't you?
Actually, we do indeed, Mary. And thanks for that introduction. And so here's what we'll be talking about today. We're obviously going to walk through the results from the third annual State of the Industry Report. Obviously, first, we're going to actually talk about what it actually is. Just in case any of you don't know, we'll provide a little bit of brief history just from a standpoint of participation, and then we'll dive in. We'll dive into the results. We'll hit some of the highlights, and what Mary and I will do is we will give our thoughts about the highlights. But one of the things I'll mention about a report like this is that it's somewhat like a Rorschach test. The survey and thought leader observations included in the report and what they mean for the industry can be open to interpretation. So We think that we have some of our thoughts about it, but certainly welcome, as Mary mentioned, your questions and/or observations in the in the question box. So with that, let's dive in a bit, and we will get started. Oh, one last thing I will mention, and this is kind of a departure from our normal approach. We won't be providing the slides to this one because simply we want you to download the report, which is free, which I'll get to in a moment. Of course, as always, any ideas expressed by us here today are our own, not those of our clients, our partner organizations, clients, or partners. So keep that in mind. And the State of the Industry report has now become an annual thing. It's published every year by eDiscovery today. We target to try to publish it right after the first of the year. And EDRM has been the sponsor all 3 years. So thanks to EDRM for that. The SOTA report is designed to reflect trends and sentiments within the eDiscovery community, and it's unique in that it's comprised of 2 components. It's the results of an industry-wide survey. Every year, it's been a simple 10-question survey. We take the approach of keep it simple, stupid, the KISS principle, and really try to make it a very quick and easy survey to complete. And in addition to the survey results, we also get a cross-section of thought leader observations across the industry, providers, law firms, corporations, and so forth, industry associations like EDRM, as Mary provided her observations in this year's report. And it's unique in that regard because it provides both looks at these trends. And as I mentioned, it is available free. All you have to do is subscribe by email to eDiscovery today. I saw a couple of people just subscribe, so thank you for that. And you'll be getting your copy here after the webinar. You simply go to eDiscoverytoday.com, the box in the upper right-hand corner, put in your email address, accept when you get the confirmation email, and then you will be receiving not just this report, but a couple of other reports that we published over the past year or so as well. So, and every report and white paper we do publish, if you're an email subscriber, you'll get those too, as well as daily emails from eDiscovery Today. So we welcome your subscription, and that's how and that's as easy as that. So, as I mentioned, this is the 3rd year of the report. And as you can see, the participation and breadth of participation has grown about 50% year over year. We started the first year with 183 respondents to the survey. That moved up to 281 last year and moved up to 410 this year. So we have over 410 respondents to this year's survey. And we've also had a similar rise in the breadth of the thought leaders participating. The first year we had 20, last year up to 29, and this year 38 thought leaders participating. So the report continues to be more widely accepted and embraced by the industry, and reflects a broader perspective of the industry as the participation goes up. So a couple of quick highlights here. The trends that we're covering here, there's 8 total trends. 2 of the questions are demographics, and the other 4 are industry trends. And they include things like remote versus in-office work, participation in in-person legal tech conferences, use of predictive coding, how many cases involve data from mobile devices or collaboration apps. A new trend we covered this year, which is use cases, what people think are the biggest eDiscovery trends for this year, and what's the eDiscovery challenge not being talked about that should be. So those are the trends we'll be discussing in this report. And what's different this year, a couple of things that we did different. Certainly the remote versus in-office work and the in-person legal tech conferences questions have evolved as the circumstances have changed. 2 years ago, we were in the heart of the pandemic, and obviously the remote work scenario and the attendance of in-person conferences was quite a bit different then than it is now. So we are reflecting that in the changing of the questions over that time. Another thing that's changed this year that was direct based on feedback from last year's survey is a do not know option was added to a few questions. We recognize that people are sometimes in different positions within the eDiscovery workflow, and they may not necessarily know about certain parts of the workflow. So we provided that option to promote their participation. And then finally, as I mentioned above, we added a new question about use cases, replacing the eDiscovery business question we asked the first 2 years. Rob Robinson of Complex D has an excellent coverage of all things eDiscovery business related. So we felt like this was a better question to ask. So with that, let's jump in to the results here. First off, demographics. We had 10 total questions, as I mentioned, 410 total respondents for the survey. And here's the breakdown. As you can see, providers were the biggest group, followed by law firms, consultancies, and corporations. And those top 4 groups had enough respondents that we were able to break out their results to the 8 questions. So we'll be touching on that as a part of this. We were hoping for government entity to get there, not quite this year. Hopefully, maybe next year as the report grows, we'll be able to add a 5th category of breakout. Also the respondents, about 7 out of 8 of them was U.S. based. So it's still a heavily U.S. influenced survey. We had more international participants than ever this year, but we also had more general participants than ever. So it is a highly U.S. based result at this point. And as I mentioned, 38 thought leaders that provided observations. So let's jump into the first category, which is remote versus office work. And what we found is, based on the survey results, 6 out of 10 respondents are still working mostly remotely, but that is a drop from last year. Last year, we were still at close to 90%. We were in the midst of, much more in the midst of COVID then. We were in the midst of the Omicron variant, and Delta was fairly recent, and so forth. This year, we're starting to see some people, more than a third actually, that have returned to the office from remote work, either in a hybrid mode or full-time or mostly full-time. So I think that's notable that we're starting to see that shift back, at least to some degree. And certainly, one of the questions that I, asked the thought leaders was, how does COVID-19 continue to impact the legal profession? And Julia Hazensaw of ProSearch talked about, the things that organizations need to do and the leadership they need to provide to make that hybrid scenario successful that a lot of us are faced today. And then when we look at the breakdown, one of the things that's really notable about this particular question is there's quite a bit of a dichotomy. Actually, you see as many as 6 out of 10 corporate respondents have returned to the office, either part or full-time, and almost half of law firm respondents have done so as well, while provider respondents and consultant respondents are still mostly working at home. Some of those, in some cases, were already working remotely before the pandemic, quite a bit of them actually, but it does certainly provide an interesting dichotomy there. So, Mary, what are your thoughts about that, and where do you think we stand as an industry today in terms of that remote versus hybrid versus in-office work scenario?
Well, it's interesting because on the previous slide, it's like only 5% never worked remote. They stayed in the office. And if you go back to pre-pandemic, there was a lot of discussion about, you had to be on site, you had to be in the office, you had to meet face to face all the time. The eDiscovery providers, if you go back to your next slide, Doug, the providers were already, about half working remotely pre-pandemic. But it's a rather dramatic increase, I think, and it allows staff to choose their location. Many people have moved, but going to the corporate and the law firm, those are the two environments where the the spontaneity of water cooler, the ability to mentor and all of that. So to have 60% of corporate respondents returning to the office part to full time, I think that's a lot. That is a lot, and had to be done planfully. And the corporations and law firms, I think, are creating environments where their staff want to come back, but then at the same time, their employees have felt the freedom of not commuting and all of that. So I think we're seeing that reflected there.
Sure, absolutely. And, I have another take on the corporate and law firm being much more returning back to the office, at least part or full time, which is honestly, they have office space that's probably pretty expensive that they paid for. And they're looking to kind of get their teams back together and kind of get back to a business as usual scenario. Whereas the providers and consultants were already used to, at least a portion of those companies were already used to working remotely, as you noted. And I think that is one of the things that's interesting. I mean, I hate to boil it down to as simple as sometimes it's the fact that we have this expensive office space and we need to use it, but I think that factors into the equation as well. So
I think so too, and I think the decision makers have private offices and they like them.
Right, absolutely, yeah, indeed, and so that's certainly one of the things I think is interesting, and we will have to see. This will be a question that may continue to evolve. At some point, it may not necessarily make sense to ask anymore, but it's certainly a trend that we're continuing to watch, and I think is continuing to be important. So, all right. So we'll move on to our next category, which is in-person legal tech conferences. And so we asked a lot of different variations because we asked people how many actually attended last year as many conferences as they did before the pandemic. And a significant percentage did. Actually, more than a third attended as many conferences as they did before the pandemic. And we actually had nearly 3 in 4 respondents who attended at least one conference. So considerably different results from the previous year, and certainly from the first year when we were much more in pandemic mode. I put in the report, we're back, baby. And, I think some people might debate that, but certainly I think that's interesting. And, it's interesting as well. Only really 3.2% said they didn't attend last year and don't expect to attend this year, and only 10.8 wasn't sure about attending this year and didn't attend last year. So even of the group that didn't attend last year, the majority of those expect to attend at least one this year. So one of the questions I asked for this one is, do you think in-person conferences are back at the level before the pandemic began? And I got varied responses from the thought leaders. And of course, our good buddy, Tom O'Connor, AKA Santa Claus there, because that's the picture he's given. And that's the picture that I'm going to continue to use because it's too good. He said, no, the enthusiasm by attendees for face-to-face meetings is there, but the enthusiasm by employers to pay for it is not. And that's interesting because when you go to the next slide, one of the things you find here is that the people that we're trying to sell to at these conferences, at least probably one of the biggest groups we're trying to sell to, the corporations, attended the conferences the least. Only 20% attended last year and plan to do it again. So that's obviously a concern if you're attending these conferences and you're saying, hey, you're looking to make corporate contacts, you're going to be hoping that number is going to go up. Law firms were much more enthusiastic about attending conferences, and more than 3/4 of them did. And certainly as many as 40% of provider respondents did attend as many. Consultancy respondents, not so much. Only 30%, or actually 30% didn't attend any one last year, and 17.5% aren't sure they're going to attend one this year. So again, a little bit of a dichotomy there. And I love Helen Geib's, Dickens quote, "The best of times, the worst of times," for in-person conferences, but it's certainly true. So, Mary, what are your thoughts about in-person conferences? Do you think they're back, and how do you expect this year is going to go in terms of attendance for them?
Well, I definitely think in-person conferences are back. I think that they're back with a little bit of a twist, in that packing people in shoulder to shoulder, that's not as desirable to everybody. People are there for meaningful connections. They're there to catch up with people they haven't seen. They're there to meet new people. And to the extent they feel like that they can further their business interests, they're going to be there. So you can see the law firms and providers are attending conferences with great enthusiasm, but the ultimate end client, the corporate respondents, being that low, I think that if you tie that to the consultancy not going to conferences, they evidently aren't finding it to their advantage to go to conferences, to make these kinds of new relationships and to extend existing relationships. I think that's what we're seeing. But Doug, you went to quite a few conferences,
I did.
and yeah. And is this the spread across corporate law firms, providers, consultancies that you saw when you were on site at the various conferences?
It is, and certainly a couple of conferences in particular, I noted quite a bit of law firm attendance, not much corporate attendance. So while the conferences were well attended, for example, ILTACON had rebounded back in a big way and had over 3,000 attendees. There was a lot of law firm attendance, not as much corporate attendance. So absolutely, I feel these numbers reflected what I saw, and I think it's interesting. And a couple of comments here from the audience, I'll note, because one of the things we asked a question, if you're not going, is it because of concerns about, the health, the health situation, or is it concerns about expenses? And one person here said conferences are really expensive, and I don't believe the ROI is there, especially since many of us also have to use our leave too, as well as pay for it ourselves, which of course I can understand that changes the equation for a lot of people that have to do that. And of course, someone else is noting, with many webinars and conferences for free online, they think everything should have an online component, which is another notable point. And last year we saw a mix of those. One of the things, of course, I understand why some of them aren't providing an online component is, hey, it might dilute their revenue model. So unfortunately, we are seeing some of the conferences that have been historically in person go back to full in person, which is unfortunate, but I can understand it from an economic standpoint. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, the other thing too is that when you do have a hybrid conference, you're actually having two conferences, the
Right.
online component and you have to manage all of that. So that's quite a challenge. The organizations that did that over the last year should be commended. But I will say, from my on the ground experience in the in-person conferences, we had three back to back with our wonderful partner Everlaw, and they were very well attended. People were just so excited. And Relativity Fest, I saw I saw some attendee lists that had quite the laundry list of consultancies. So I think that consultancy thing, I wonder if it I wonder if that's like conference by conference.
Yeah, I don't know, but certainly, yeah, good point. RelFest was well attended in person, and they did have an online component too, as I recall. So
they did,
yeah. So yeah, there are conferences out there that do both. All right, so let's move on to the next one, which is predictive coding, and this is one that this is the first question we've asked the same way all 3 years. This year, what we found is a little less than 30%, 29.2 exactly, use predictive coding technologies and approaches in all or most of their cases. But unfortunately, more than a third use it in very few or none of their cases, and less than half use it at least half the time. So one of the questions I asked this time is what change what could change to make people use predictive coding more? What single development could have people adopt predictive coding more, and leave it to our Judge Peck, who mentioned more consistent court rulings favoring use of because he obviously noted that we covered actually as part of our case law webinars a case last year, the allergen biocell case, where they denied the use of search terms followed by tar, which was surprising because we had quite a number of cases where that had been approved previously. So certainly a great point, and one of the things that certainly reflects people not using it more is inconsistent court rulings. If you break it down within the group, corporate is using it less than anybody, which again is a concern. Law firms and providers use it more than average. Interestingly enough, providers, some of which are selling the technology, were actually lower than the law firm consultants or the law firm respondents. And consultants were exactly, balanced. 20.6.8 use it in all or most of their cases, and the same percentage use it in very few or none of their cases. So kind of an interesting mix there. One of the things that, and we'll get to on the next slide here, but I'll mention it before I ask you a question, Mary Duarte from United Lex, both thought, doesn't think there will be an increase in the adoption of predictive coding. And one of the things he notes is the data sources, collaboration apps, mobile communication may not be a fit for our current protocols. So, Mary, what are your thoughts about this year's results and why they were the way they were?
Well, Doug, as you know from our webinar early, it was either earlier in the week or it was last week. I have no concept of time anymore. I mean, I am the glass half full person on this, because for looking at less than 8% of 410 respondents said that they never used tar or predictive coding on their cases, which means that well over 90% have used it for at least one and some. And I think getting people over that initial barrier to try it for the first time, I think that's one of the barriers, and I think that we've crashed through that, certainly with this crowd. In terms of using it on all your cases, I don't know that you have to use it on all your cases. I think you should probably consider it on all your cases, but I don't think I don't think that that's the appropriate metric for predictive coding adoption.
Okay. Yeah. And I certainly agree. Not every case is suited for predictive coding. And it certainly would be interesting to see more organizations use it on most of their cases, which we certainly didn't see this year. And per what Derek talked about in terms of the increase in adoption, this is a slide we actually did a year-over-year comparison for, because it's the same question every year, and we discussed it. That webinar was Wednesday. I know time flies together, kind of melts together, doesn't it? But yes, our ethics and AI webinar with Dr. Maura Grossman and Tom O'Connor, and of course the two of us. We looked, and essentially the adoption of predictive coding is somewhat stagnant. You actually saw a drop from 2021 to 2022 in terms of usage, and then a little bit of a rebound this year. As Mary pointed out, finding the glass very half full this year is only 7.4% said they don't use it at all, which is encouraging, and certainly illustrates that there is some good news there. And one of the things that I think of course, is notable here is, this is a survey being completed by people who care about eDiscovery. So I'm not sure if we extended to the entire legal profession what the numbers would be, but it is notable that the numbers are kind of staying fairly flat. And one of the reasons, of course, that is a challenge. Ellen Blanchard from T-Mobile, one of our corporate respondents, talked about the burdensome invasive information you have to provide about the process used for predictive coding. Maura Grossman talked about that with the eDiscovery Medicine Show article she and Gordon Cormack wrote on Wednesday. So that was certainly something there, and certainly something I've heard a lot. Mary, any other thoughts about predictive coding and some of the some of the things that are keeping people from using it more?
I think you had a comment from Robert Keeling, the chair of our EDRM Global Advisory Council, and I think he mentioned something about a better interface would be more inviting to people for predictive coding, and I think that's spot on, as well as not making it an upcharge, because when you have the budget decision in there, that's just another barrier.
Right, which I believe was a comment you provided as part of the thought leader observations on that in terms of the upcharge aspect. And that was a great point by Robert. The more intuitive we can make it, the easier it can be. I think we're getting to the point that some of the providers almost are running it behind the scenes and people don't know. So there could be some of these people don't realize predictive coding's happening, and that could be a part of the consideration as well. I do think that it will be interesting to see how adoption progresses or doesn't based on a variety of factors, including different ESI data types and things of that nature over time. All right, now we'll move to mobile devices. And the first year we asked a mobile devices collaboration apps question combined, which was a mistake on my part because you can't really then assess them individually. So in the past 2 years, we've broken them out. And so this year, what percentage of the cases involve discovery from mobile devices? We found that almost a third of respondents either always has or usually has mobile devices in their cases. Not quite a fourth, either never has or rarely has it. And so about half, close to half, have it, some to half of the time. So we did see those numbers go up in terms of overall usage from last year. We had actually I think almost nearly 5% rise in the people who have it, who either always or most or usually have it. So we are seeing some progress in terms of people, involving mobile device data in their cases. And certainly one of the questions I asked from a thought leader standpoint is, what's the biggest challenge that organizations face today regarding discovery of mobile device data? And Gavin Maines of Avancic had a pretty interesting response that I hadn't thought of. Android is much more difficult from a collection standpoint than iOS is. So that's one of the things worldwide, Android is, there's more Android phones than iPhones. So that certainly adds to the challenge when it comes to mobile device e-discovery, of course, is the collection challenge and getting those phones away from people. When you look at it from a breakdown standpoint, you kind of wonder if corporate people even have mobile devices, because more than half of them rarely or never have mobile device data in their cases, and only 10.8% has it most of the time. None of them have it all of the time. It's much different numbers. Law firms are certainly much closer to the average, and providers and consultants are much higher. Actually, providers, 37.6 has it all or most of the time, and consultants, more than 4 in 10 have it all or most of the time. So that's really interesting. And of course, Craig Ball, who never minces words, says it's shameful how we normalize exploitive cost and undue complexity when it comes to mobile evidence. And he has a great mobile device evidence guide that he published a few years ago. That was really terrific, and certainly encourage you all to go check that out. So Mary, thoughts about the discovery from mobile devices? What's where do we stand, and what's holding people back from doing it more?
Well, again, I do think that the number of respondents that say they do have cases with mobile devices, I think if you look back 5 years ago, this is a sea change. However, having said that, the data from the corporate side, what I read into that, that half rarely or never has the mobile device data, that it's so difficult to deal with that when they do have it, they probably send it out and get some help, either from providers, law firms, or consultancies. And I think that's why we may see those numbers as higher than the corporate area. What do you think is it causes the corporate to be so different than those that are serving them, Doug?
I certainly agree with that, Mary. And I also think, one of the things, of course, when it comes to corporate eDiscovery is the corporations focus on the data that's really under their control. Collaboration apps, which we'll get to in a minute, is much more in their control, as are a lot of the enterprise systems and so forth. A lot of the devices, when it comes to mobile devices, are BYOD devices. So a lot of organizations still don't have BYOD policies. We actually are going to cover a case next week where BYOD policies still didn't force an organization to produce discovery, and it becomes a lot less of a custody and control consideration. So that's my thought as to why corporations maybe don't have mobile device data as much. It's kind of they don't think of it, or they try to really steer towards the sources they have more custody and control of.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's certainly interesting. It'll be an area to watch. We had a lot of different great thought leader responses about everything from the collection to how the information is managed in discovery. Text messages are always a challenge because you have they're much differently they're much different in terms of conversations than emails and so forth. So a lot of that comes into play, and it will really be interesting to see. This will be one of the questions we continue to ask year over year to see how the trends change. All right, so next up, collaboration apps. Same question, different ESI source. And here, more than 1 in 4 respondents either always has or usually has collaboration app data. And about not quite a third either never has or rarely has it. So about 4 in 10 have it some or half the time. And those numbers are trending upward. So in terms of the either or always has, up about 1.7% from last year, and actually in terms of the never or rarely has it, down about 5%, over 5% from last year. So some progress in terms of the eDiscovery being involved with collaboration apps. Obviously, one of the cases, Mary, that we did a webinar about was the Red Wolf case. With the United Lex and Armstrong Teasdale team, that was very significant Slack case and so forth. And certainly, I think the question that I ask, of course, with regard to that is, to what extent organizations are not yet addressing them. What do you think their biggest reason is for not doing so? Dave Rule from Hanso talked about, how to work with the data and some of the challenges there. And obviously, when you deal with Slack, you deal with JSON format, and you got to kind of have a way of dealing with that data and working with that data and so forth. So yeah, collaboration apps, of which there is a ton of them, not just Slack and Teams and Zoom and so forth. There's more than you can count, are certainly a challenge. when you break down here, this is one of the categories where corporate respondents they're the leaders. Almost half, very close to half, have a collaboration app data all or most of the time, which they're the ones who have they're the ones who have the source data. So I thought that was very interesting. Conversely, law firm respondents very rarely have it, and as you can see by the second bullet point there. From a provider and consultants, from a provider standpoint, they're up there, and the consultancy group definitely dropped quite a bit from last year. Only less than 1 in 4 has it all or most of the time. Last year it was more than a third. And obviously, T.A. Egan from legal, who has that corporate perspective, because she was at a corporation as well as now at legal, understands the inherent risks of organizations that collaboration apps have. So one of the things that's interesting here, so many people are talking about discovery of collaboration apps, and when you see corporate buying into that being important, it kind of makes you understand why. Mary, what are your thoughts about the trends this year for discovery of collaboration apps?
Oh, I think it ballooned, certainly in the corporate
Mm-hmm.
area. And as you've been reviewing this data, I wonder if, from the corporate perspective, the role of text messaging is taken over by a Slack or a Zoom chat or something like that. That the collaboration app data is more important from a business standpoint than the maybe more personal texting back and forth. But you can see the emphasis here, and I think that I think it's an eye opener. What do you think, Doug? Tracy Ann says in her comment that lawyers in legal departments rarely use collaboration apps. What do you think about that?
Well, that's interesting, and that certainly doesn't surprise me. So obviously, that's of course, the question is, lawyers and legal departments don't use it as much, but obviously they still have to discover data from it. So that becomes the question: are they holding back because they don't understand it as much, or is it a case where they know they've got to do it? In the case of like the legal departments, the corporate legal departments, and so forth. So yeah, absolutely. I did notice that. I was only able to fit part of her response there in the slide here, but again, you all can check out the report for her full response. But yeah, that's one of the things. You raise an interesting point there, Mary, because I absolutely agree. In fact, I expect organizations might really direct their employees to communicate via these collaboration apps from their messaging standpoint, much more than texting via their phones. And I wouldn't be surprised in a year or two to see the collaboration app discovery pass the mobile device discovery in terms of percentages for that reason, because I think that organizations will say, don't use your text to communicate, use Slack or Teams or what have you. So, all right. Our next category is a brand new question. See, I'm not a rudder. I can change questions. And so this year, we decided to ask, because I've been saying for some time, eDiscovery isn't just about litigation anymore. So we decided to put it to the test. And we asked the question, to what use cases do you or your organization apply eDiscovery technology in workflows? And we got some very interesting results. There are actually 7 use cases that are being applied by at least 40% of survey respondents. So it's not just litigation, but it's investigations, it's arbitration, incident response, privacy requests, even government information requests, HSR second requests, all above 40%. So I thought that was very interesting and really truly illustrates that point of the fact that eDiscovery is being used quite a lot for a lot of other different types of use cases. And certainly, Sal, Sal from Oasis talking about the info security aspect of eDiscovery technology and using that. That was one of the use cases, the incident response, and we've certainly seen a lot of that come into play. And then when you go to the breakdowns, there were not a lot of variability here, but we certainly had, we had corporate had a fourth hitting the 50% mark privacy requests, which is not surprising. Law firm had the fewest that were in the 40% mark, so they were the least diverse. And only one incident response barely made it at 40%. But providers actually had 8 use cases over 40% and 6 of them over 50. They are probably not surprisingly, because they have to sell software and workflows to support these, the most diverse, and consultancy not far behind. And certainly Wendy Cole of OpenText talking about regulatory response and compliant use cases. It's definitely on the rise, and we're seeing that. So, Mary, what are your thoughts about the diversity of use cases from our respondents?
I love this question, and I love this data. Thank you, Doug, for including it in the survey, because the entire eDiscovery community is so well steeped in the first use case, which is litigation. And over the last 20 years, organizations and individuals have created specialties for like the second request or internal investigation. And it was more like, oh, I'm going to turn the technology to this problem, create a different process, involve some different stakeholders. And you didn't have a view for how much was out there. And this is just a rich horizon of opportunity, not only for organizations that are providing the services, but also for the organizations that are buying them, because you can really get a nice budget bump by by not having to buy multiple technology stacks, not having to train multiple teams on similar items, and to redeploy personnel into higher octave areas, instead of saying, okay, now we've been iterating on litigation now for 20 years. Now we're done, and you can go work totally outside of the eDiscovery community. Look at these other areas to apply the expertise to. So, Doug, thank you for that. And what do you see in this, and why did you include this question?
Well, so it's kind of one of the things that's been a little bit of a mantra of mine for the past few years. And, I've repeated, eDiscovery isn't just about litigation anymore. And I was thinking we need a different question. We need something new. And that one hit me. And I think one of the things that the results from this question show is that just because you don't have a lot of litigation doesn't mean you don't have a need for eDiscovery. There's so many other potential types of things that happen that involve eDiscovery that you really can argue any organization needs eDiscovery. They're bound to have investigations. They're bound to have privacy requests. They're bound to have potential cyber incidents and have to have incident response. All of those factor in as a great use case for eDiscovery. So I thought these results were very interesting and enlightening, and I think you all have to check out the thought leader observations because what they consider to be, in terms of the question I asked of what besides litigation, what do you think is becoming the most common use case for eDiscovery technology and workflows? The responses were varied, and of course they provide the reasons. So that I think that's something to check out. So certainly encourage that.
Yeah, one area, Doug, that I didn't see was contract litigation life cycle or management, and I'm seeing that as a separate thing now. What's your sense?
Absolutely, no, it's a great point, and that is one that I honestly unintentionally omitted. We'll certainly include it in the survey next year, assuming we'll re-ask the same question, because absolutely, I think that eDiscovery workflows, at least to some degree, are being applied to the contract life cycle management process and contract analytics and so forth. The technology, the workflows, all of it applies. It's really getting to the point where if you have a need to understand your data, it's an eDiscovery workflow and involves eDiscovery technology, and that fits. So contracts are data like anything else. So now the biggest trends of 2023, and once again, collaboration apps wins the discovery of collaboration apps, and this time the biggest percentage ever, where 38, basically 3 out of 8 identified it as the biggest trend. I thought last year was the year of the collaboration app with some of the cases we had, but it's even more so this year. And you can see there in that first bullet point how much it grew over the past couple of years in terms of the percentage who selected it. The second and third most selected were increased use of AI technology and increased use of cloud-based solutions, eDiscovery solutions. And the 3 of those combined out of the 9 choices to be more than 2/3 of respondents. And look at that, Mary Mack's at the bottom of the slide. And what I asked this year was, what do you think will be the biggest eDiscovery related trend? So Mary, you provided this response. You want to provide any additional commentary toward that?
Well, when you asked me, Doug, structured data and the crypto collapse were on my mind. The encrypted Apple iPhones. I think if you asked me today, I'd probably talk a little bit more about AI and the mainstreaming of AIs with that Chat GPT and the DALL-E. More and more people are using the AI tools, and so I think we're going to see more of that in the eDiscovery area. But seriously, 23 years in eDiscovery, and the number of cases with structured data being at the heart of them, I mean, they are certainly up there, the Madoff cases and things like that. But I think the complexity of crypto and all of the unwinding that's being done is going to cause our community to get very, very sharp on our structured data, in addition to our unstructured data that's now being input into all these AI systems. And I think we're going to see a distinction between user-created data and AI-assisted user-created data.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I loved your response, because it was actually tied into one of my 5 trends to expect from this year I wrote about last week, because certainly the FTX collapse and some of the other, I think there were something like at least 5 other cryptocurrencies that collapsed last year, which of course leads to litigation. FTX already has it. And we're seeing that those cryptocurrency wallets and blockchain data and so forth going to be part of discovery. In fact, we're covering a case next week that involves a cryptocurrency, a subpoena to cryptocurrencies for data. So I think we're going to see more of those. So I agree completely. We're going to see more of that. If we look from a standpoint across the groups, all 4 groups had collaboration app data as their top choice. The only question was how much. A couple of the others that worked their way in most cases, the increased use of AI and increased use of cloud-based solutions were in there. Move to the left of the EDRM model was in there as a top choice from a provider respondent standpoint. And law firm respondents who were the group that least selected that they were doing discovery of a collaboration app data, was the largest group by far to select it in terms of their top choice. So I guess the first sign of addressing a problem is realizing you have a problem. So at least they know that's a big trend that needs to be addressed, and they selected it. And I love Irfan's comment here in terms of discovery at source is discovery in the wild, and that certainly comes into play. So, Mary, any other thoughts about the biggest trends for this coming year?
No, but I do think you called out the right approach. The corporations are so interested in the collaboration data, and then you can see the law firm respondents. They're going to get to it this year. And I think that that's really exciting. And the move to the left of the EDRM model, I love seeing that question there. I want to see it next year and see if it's moved. So many solutions and organizations are applying things like indexing and processing way at the beginning of the model so that they're able to collect more surgically or preserve more surgically. And so I'm really interested to see if that increases over time, Doug.
Yeah, I am too. And I'm hearing more and more people talk about index in place and targeted collections. And I think it's going to be interesting to see as that develops. How is that going to impact the downstream companies that are dealing with hosting the data? So it will be interesting to see how that progresses, and certainly be something to keep an eye on. So the last question I always ask every year is, what's the eDiscovery challenge not enough people in the industry are talking about? This is the third year in a row I've had not just the same question, but the same choices. Next year, I think I may try to vary up the choices a bit. And for the third year in a row, lack of eDiscovery competence was the top eDiscovery challenge that people feel is not being talked about enough. However, it was not. It was the lowest percentage this year that selected it, and in fact, so last year 30% selected it as the top challenge. So this year it was 6.6% lower than that, and two groups. One group didn't select it as their top choice for the first time, and for another group it was tied as the top choice, which we'll get to in a moment. In terms of second, third. Index in place indexing and the move to the left of the EDRM model was second. So a lot of people feel like it's not being talked about enough. And discovery of collaboration app data was third. So even though we think everybody thinks it's the trend of the year, and we still think we should talk about it more. So okay. Jeffrey Wolf of iPro certainly talks about overcollection of data. What we talked about, targeted collection, as certainly one of the challenges not being talked about enough. When you look at it from a group standpoint, corporate respondents, only 17.5% identified that, which was tied. So they tied it with increased cybersecurity. Understandable that corporate would have more of a focus on increased cybersecurity. Law firms and consultants chose eDiscovery competence most. But providers didn't even choose it in their top two. Discovery of collaboration app data was top, and in-place indexing was second. So in-place indexing consistently appeared amongst the different groups, which was notable. And certainly Maureen Holland of AstraZeneca, another one of our corporate respondents, thought leaders, talked about some of the challenges, people skills, resources, and the skills that you have to learn that involve things outside of the norm eDiscovery type stuff. That's one of the challenges. As we evolve, we have to learn new things. So, Barry, what do you think is the eDiscovery challenge not being talked about enough?
Well, it's interesting that law firms and consultants chose the eDiscovery competence at high levels like that, but that the corporate respondents did not. And so it sounds like the corporate respondents are looking more towards the cyber. And we've been in conversation with partners and others, and there's a sense that there's an educational lift to do. So competence just doesn't automatically happen. And if an organization gets into eDiscovery trouble without having the requisite knowledge, there's like an educational effort that needs to go on before you can have the client make meaningful choices. And so with the law firms and consultants choosing competence, I think that's what that frustration is. But it's interesting to me that providers did not choose that. So it seems that they have solved that issue.
Yeah, well, and I guess sometimes the question is, who do we think are the ones who need the eDiscovery competence? Certainly, I've been historically in a provider role, and that's one of the things I've always found. Like the best client was an informed and educated client, and maybe enough providers this year thought, well, it seems like the ones we're working with, that's not the big challenge. So here are some of the other things that we think aren't being talked about enough. So it's very interesting to see, and with that, those are the results there. And Mary, we are at the top of the hour, and we recognize some of you may have to drop off. Mary, I'll just ask one final question, which is, what else, if anything, do you see for this coming year?
I feel that this coming year is going to have like a rocky IT foundational feel to it, much like what happened with the FAA failure. What they're reporting is 2 contractors may have changed a file. In my mind, it was probably a config file because it's a 30-year-old system, config file, text editor, and boom, planes aren't flying. And so I think we're in a rickety state, and our eDiscovery world is used to very, very smooth, no interruptions. And so it behooves us to get our business continuity and disaster recovery into play, let alone all these data types. So Doug, you've been deep in these numbers. What do you see that we haven't talked about?
I really think that one of the things that we could stand to talk about more is kind of the access to justice from a small party consideration, small firms, solo practitioners, and so forth. We still see a lot of them. They're not using the technology. Reasons for that. Some of them is the not fully understanding the ROI or benefits. I do think there are some solutions out there that are suitable for smaller firms and solos, but obviously a lot of the marketing dollars goes to the bigger companies. So I definitely think that's one of the things, and that's probably a choice I'll add to the challenge not being talked about enough next year is we're not focusing enough on getting eDiscovery out to those masses. And I definitely think that's one thing that it will be interesting to see if that evolves. I keep saying every year somebody's going to come up with something that everybody in the legal world is going to have, and technology to embrace. Certainly, when we've seen with the pandemic, when lawyers are forced to embrace technology, aka Zoom, when they all had to start going to remote meetings, they managed to quickly learn how to do it and do it successfully. We may need something like that at the litigation eDiscovery kind of realm to get to more firms to decide we've got to have this technology. Maybe the use cases will spur them, but we'll see. All right. And Ms. Mack, I think with that, I will turn it back over to you to close us out.
All right. Well, I thank all of you for listening, and I thank all of you who participated in the survey. Our community is just absolutely wonderful from that standpoint, being willing to share opinions like that. And you can access the resources Kaylee announced earlier by clicking on the paperclip on the side of your console, and there you will have up next Cyber Nostradamus. So we'll have some predictions and what awaits in 2023 from a cyber perspective from the Lockhaven Solutions, the Dever brothers, as Kaylee had said earlier. And to get your complimentary copy of the 2023 State of the Industry Report, there's a link there for you to subscribe to Doug's blog. And then don't miss out on our important eDiscovery case law decisions for January 2023. There's a link for you to register there. And I would hazard a guess that there'll be a link there at the case law for Tom O'Connor's new book, eDiscovery for the Rest of Us, which will address some of the problem that you were talking about, Doug, with access to justice, smaller case discovery. And we thank you, Doug. You are our trusted partner in your personal self as well as eDiscovery Today, your wonderful blog. Thank you for your work on this survey. Thank you to our community for supporting the survey. And Doug, making the results available to us like this, we are just so grateful. Our thanks to the EDRM community for your kind attention today, and tune in next time for more on the EDRM Global Webinar channel. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for attending.